The sea around the Flannan Isles is rarely still. Even in the mildest of weather, the waters surge with a ceaseless pulse, as if echoing some forgotten rhythm. Winds sweep across the jagged cliffs, brushing against the ancient stone with fingers cold and wet. On the largest of these islets, Eilean Mor, stands the lonely lighthouse, a sentinel of whitewashed stone that gazes eternally across the Atlantic. It was December of 1900, when the silence first whispered through the winds, when the keepers of the Flannan Isles light vanished without a trace, leaving behind not chaos, but a world frozen mid-motion. The island, remote and windswept, had long been a place of solemn duty and isolation. The lighthouse, completed just 1 year earlier in 1899, stood 75 feet tall. Its lantern, meant to cut through fog and darkness, was manned by 3 keepers: Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur. Life there was one of quiet routine. Rotations lasted weeks, punctuated only by supply visits from the Hesperus, a tender ship tasked with ferrying provisions and relief staff. Yet when the Hesperus made her routine call just after Christmas in 1900, something was wrong. Captain Harvey, in command of the Hesperus, knew something was amiss even before they landed. No one was waiting to greet them at the dock. The flagpole stood bare, the supply boxes were untouched, and there was no sign of life. The island should have echoed with the bustle of relieved men, the welcome of weather-beaten hands ready to unload food and letters from the mainland. But only the wind responded, low and listless. Harvey sent a relief keeper ashore. What he found would ripple through time in whispers and speculation. The lighthouse door was unlocked. Inside, all was neat and in place, almost disturbingly so. The clock had stopped, the beds were made, a meal had been set, untouched, as if abandoned mid-bite. A chair lay overturned near the kitchen table. Most tellingly, the logbook remained open, the last entries chilling in their calm dread. They spoke of violent storms battering the island, of unnatural winds, of waves that clawed at the tower. But there had been no storm. The surrounding seas had remained calm those days, confirmed by ships that passed within view. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, had written the entries in a trembling, deliberate hand. He described the chief keeper, Duckett, as unusually quiet. MacArthur, typically known for his temper, had been weeping. Weeping in a man hardened by war and sea. The logbook noted a storm on December 12th, fierce beyond reckoning, yet no such weather had been reported. God is over all, Marshall concluded, just before the entries ceased. That was the final line. After that, nothing. Investigations followed. Theories sprang up like mushrooms in the damp mystery. Some suggested the men had been swept into the sea, perhaps while trying to secure equipment during a sudden wave. But their foul weather gear, heavy coats and oilskins, remained in place. Only one set was missing. Others claimed it was madness or murder, that isolation had taken its toll. But the logbook entries, while ominous, held no sign of a breakdown. They were calm, too calm, like the eye of a storm that had never existed. And then came the stories. Local fishermen spoke of lights dancing above the island that December, of strange figures seen moving along the cliffs. Some whispered of the little people, the fey folk of Gaelic legend who stole men away in the mist. There were tales of sea spirits, of ancient curses that clung to lonely places. Eilean Mor, after all, had long been a sacred place. The ruins of a small chapel remained near the lighthouse. For centuries it had been a place of pilgrimage, watched over by monks whose names had been lost to time. Long before the lighthouse, the monks of Eilean Mor tended a quiet life of prayer and contemplation. The island's name itself means Big Island in Gaelic, though it is hardly large. Their stone cells and chapel had faced the sea, always the sea, and even in death they seemed to remain turned toward it. Some said the lighthouse had disturbed old spirits, that the building of that towering flame had trespassed on ground not meant for such things. The monks, they whispered, had never truly left. For weeks after the disappearance, search parties combed the island. They found nothing. No bodies, no clues beyond the eerie domestic stillness within the tower. The eastern landing showed signs of damage, ropes torn, a supply box splintered, but the damage was inconsistent, as if done not by storm but by something more surgical, more precise. There were no drag marks, no signs of struggle, only silence. Back on the mainland, the newspapers had a field day. They printed the log entries in full, with embellishments. They speculated wildly, linking the case to other disappearances, even to ghost ships. The Ministry of Transport eventually issued a report suggesting the men had been lost to the sea while attempting to secure a crane during rough weather. It was a rational explanation, a comforting one, but it left too many questions. Why would two men leave the safety of the tower in a storm, real or imagined, without coats? Why the overturned chair? Why the tears in MacArthur's eyes? The story faded, but it never vanished. It lingered in whispers, in the uneasy glances of sailors who passed Eilean Mor and refused to anchor. Some claimed they heard voices there at night, laughter, screams. Others saw nothing, but felt watched, deeply watched, as if the island itself had eyes. The new lighthouse keepers who came after refused to speak of their time there, not directly. Some left mid-tour, citing illness. One, according to rumor, went mad, babbling about monks at his window in the dark. Today the lighthouse is automated. There are no more keepers, no more logbooks scrawled with strange entries. But the stone remains. The tower stands, weathered and wind-scoured, its beacons still slicing through fog and dusk. The chapel ruins too remain, where seabirds nest among the broken stones. Eilean Mor is silent again. But silence is not the same as peace. In the years since, new generations have sought to explain the disappearance. Psychologists suggest shared delusion or folie à trois, a madness among three. Meteorologists propose rogue waves, towering walls of water that rise without warning. Even geologists join the chorus, pointing to tremors, to rockfalls. But the logbook still stands. Its final words echo through time. God is over all. It is not the storm that chills. It is the calm. Eilean Mor has no trees. Only low grasses and exposed rock. The wind has no obstruction, no pause. When the sun sets there, it does so with a suddenness that leaves the world blue and grey. The sea glows in those final minutes, phosphorescent, alive. If one were to stand on the western cliff at dusk, they might hear something behind the roar. A whisper, a weeping, or only the imagination. Lighthouses are places of clarity, of function. They pierce darkness, offer guidance, but in piercing they also illuminate what should remain hidden. The Flannan light, in its brief tenure under human care, illuminated something far stranger than ships. It lit a mystery that has never truly dimmed. Whatever happened to Ducat, Marshall and MacArthur, it did not follow the rules of sea or sanity. It was said by those who returned that the island felt heavier after the disappearance, the air more charged, the soil less yielding underfoot. A few men assigned to subsequent shifts reported dreams, vivid, bizarre sequences of monks with hollow eyes walking across the waves. One such account, dismissed at the time, described chanting in Latin coming from the chapel ruins. There was no record of any religious texts left on the island, no signs of recent activity in the chapel, except seabird droppings and the soft collapse of stone. But the dreams, continued. What does it mean when a place remembers? Eilean Mor seemed to carry its memory not in carved stone or folklore alone, but in presence. The keeper's log entries, terse and functional before December, grew stranger as the year turned. There were notes about missing tools, misplaced lanterns, and footsteps heard in the stairwell. All of it could have been explained by fatigue, and yet, in the final weeks, the entries turned solemn, as if the island was watching, and the men writing knew it. A lighthouse is a machine, precise, scheduled, relentless. But men are not machines, especially not men in isolation, surrounded by nothing but sea and sky and stone. Thomas Marshall, a man known for steadiness, noted in his When researchers decades later re-examined the original logs, they found scratch marks on some of the final pages. Not writing, but scores from a quill, as if someone had hesitated, then dragged the pen downward in silence. What thought could not be written? What fear was too large for words? Even now, digital scans show the impression of fingers, grease or ink, smudging the bottom corners. Someone had lingered there, long enough to leave behind more than ink. Weather patterns were reviewed again and again. December of 1900 was cold, but not exceptional. Nearby islands reported normal seas, no record of lightning, no tremors. The island was stable geologically, according to contemporary surveys. And yet, something shifted in those final hours. The keeper's disappearance does not match any storm incident on record. No bodies surfaced, no wreckage. Just 3 men, their lives paused mid-motion, removed from the world as if lifted by unseen hands. The chapel ruins on Eilean Mor tell their own tale. Built of rough stone likely in the 7th or 8th century, it was a hermitage more than a church. The monks who lived there would have been solitary, likely maintaining silence for days at a time. They wrote little, left fewer records, but their presence lingers. Moss grows thicker there. Wind quiets, unnaturally so, when one enters. Pilgrims, few though they are, leave offerings still, candles, feathers, coins. Some return claiming dreams, similar to those of the keepers. Waves that whisper, monks that weep. Superstition holds its ground longer on islands. Cut off from the mainlands, stories grow like seaweed, anchored in darkness, swaying with each tide of telling. The people of the Hebrides never fully accepted the official report. To them, the disappearance was not a tragedy but a sign. Some believed the lighthouse, as a flame of man, had angered the deep, that the sea spirits, or perhaps the old gods, had taken their due. 3 men, 3 flames, 1 island. Maritime lore is rich with vanished ships, ghostly cries, and places best left alone. Sailors are not prone to poetry, but they are attuned to pattern, and Eilean Mor soon became a pattern of avoidance. Captains changed course. Supply runs were made faster, with fewer words exchanged. A priest once tried to bless the island, but he never reached shore. His boat capsized in clear weather. He survived, but would not speak of what he saw in the water, only that it was taller than the boat and older than the sea. In the years that followed, as the world modernized and the lighthouse grew automated, attention faded. But the logs remained. Stored in archives, accessed only occasionally, they whisper still. Some pages were removed over time, officially lost, but copies exist. In one such copy, hidden in a university collection, there's a marginal note beside the final entry. It reads, 3 went out, but 4 were seen. The handwriting is different, no name attached. And so the mystery persists. Not just in facts, but in the intangible. In the sense that some vanishings are not meant to be solved, only remembered. The sea does not give up her dead easily, and islands like Eilean Mor do not yield their secrets. The tower still stands. The light still turns. But the wind, if you listen closely, still asks the question the world has not answered. Where did the keepers go? And who, or what, watched them go? The sea has long been both cradle and crypt. It nurtures, but it takes. On stormless nights, fishermen near Eilean Mor reported hearing bells, low, sonorous chimes echoing from nowhere. Some claimed it was the sea interacting with submerged rock. Others insisted it was the monk's chapel, the bell still ringing deep beneath the surface. But there was no bell recorded in the light. In one of the few surviving personal letters from a keeper stationed after the disappearance, dated 1903, a man named Ewan describes a night where the stars vanished one by one, not behind clouds, but as if snuffed out by something unseen. He mentions a pressure in the air, like the breath of something watching. His letter, written to a sister in Inverness, ends abruptly, mid-sentence. The rest of the page is blank, save for a faint stain in the corner, possibly ink, possibly something else. Not all stories about Eilean Mor are solemn. Some locals tell of a strange peace that overtakes visitors, a profound stillness that silences worry and fear. They say the island gives this as a gift, or perhaps a bribe, to keep the world from looking too closely. But even peace, in such a place, carries a cost. The few who claim to have felt it return changed, not visibly, but in how they listen, how they stare at the sea, as if hearing things the rest of us do not. The idea of thresholds appears again and again in stories about the Flannan Isles. Moments where time folds, where one step might take you somewhere else entirely. Places that don't follow the rules of maps or logic. There are even whispers of a shepherd in the 18th century who vanished from the island mid-sentence, his dog returning alone, mad with fear. No name survives, just a tale, passed from boat to boat, that a place exists where men disappear between heartbeats. Could the keepers have walked into such a place? The door left open, one coat missing, a chair overturned. The signs suggest haste but not violence. If they heard something not of this world, would they have followed? Not out of curiosity but compulsion. MacArthur was said to be deeply superstitious, Marshall, deeply spiritual, Ducat, steady but quiet. If the island called, perhaps each heard it in their own way. Perhaps none could resist. When the Ministry of Transport filed its final report, it closed the case with reluctant finality. Accidental death, lost to the sea. But the last paragraph notes something odd, an observation from a junior officer. He reported that one of the tower's upper windows had been shattered inward, as though something had entered, not exited. The report marked it as irrelevant, citing wind. But the glass, some believe, told a different story. That window has since been repaired, but the story remains. The silence around it has become louder with time, like a pressure building behind closed doors. As we approach the end of this account, we must ask, why does this mystery endure? Why does the disappearance of 3 men over a century ago still hold us? Perhaps it is because the facts refuse to settle, because what was left behind is too perfect, too deliberate, too still. There are places in the world that resist understanding, that do not want to be known. Eilean Mor may be one, a fragment of older land, older lore. Its winds do not blow as ours do. Its stones remember things our histories forget. The monks who once prayed there understood this. Perhaps the keepers in their final days began to understand as well, and in that understanding were unmade. The lighthouse still stands, its light sweeping across the waves in calm indifference. But no one is there to tend it now. It blinks on, blinks off, guided by machines. Perhaps that is safer. No more eyes to see what walks the cliffs at night. No more ears to hear the weeping in the wind. No more minds to dream of vanished stars and whispered Latin. Only silence and light. It is said that the sea keeps its secrets better than any grave. But islands too are keepers. They store memory in root and rock, in the slow decay of chapel stones and the stubborn persistence of grass through cracks. Eilean Mor remembers. It does not forgive. It waits. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, it tells its story. Not in words, but in dread. So listen, not with ears, but with the part of you that wakes before the dawn, that senses when a room is not empty, that knows when a place has been marked by more than time. The mystery of the Flannan Isles is not a puzzle to solve, but a reminder that not all lights guide, that some doors once opened do not close, that silence is never truly silent, especially on Eilean Mor. If this story has held you, it is not by coincidence. Stories like this choose their listeners. They come not as warnings, but as invitations to remember, to wonder, to feel the chill that slips between certainty and silence. For in every vanished man, in every light that goes dark without cause, there is a question that remains unanswered, a thread left dangling in the fabric of understanding. The monks, the keepers, the shadows, they are not lost, only waiting. So what would you do, dear listener, if you heard that call? A whisper in the wind, a flicker of light on a cliff where no one stands. Would you turn away? Or would you climb the steps of the tower and look? Would you open the chapel door, step through the veil of moss and stone, and listen? Not all who vanish are taken. Some walk willingly into the mist, because something in them remembers, something old, something drawn to the edge where the world frays. And if you find yourself on the sea one day, and the weather turns still, and your compass spins, and you see the light of Eilean Mor where none should be, know this: you are not alone. The keepers are there, the monks are there, and something else as well, something that watches, that remembers, that waits. So close your eyes, hold your breath, and if the wind calls your name, do not answer, not unless you mean to follow. For one man did. His name was Aidan Fife, and though the official records say nothing of him, his story survives in a bundle of unsent letters found in the attic of an abandoned croft house in Mull. The letters, never addressed, never stamped, speak to a woman named Moira, someone Aidan had once loved. Dated from the late spring of 1919, they begin as ordinary reflections, war memories, lost friends, sleepless nights. But by the fifth letter, something shifts. Aidan writes of dreams, of a tower. He writes of voices, low, chanting, carried to him across still waters. They speak of return, he says in one, not mine, but theirs. By the eighth letter, he tells Moira that he has found a boat, but he cannot rest until he knows what calls to him. There is a place west of here, he writes, where the rocks rise like teeth from the sea, and the wind forgets to howl. I must go. The final letter is dated midsummer, and it ends with a line that has chilled every scholar who has read it. If I do not return, know this, it welcomed me. He was never seen again. But 3 months later, a fisherman off the coast of Harris found a boat drifting empty. Inside was a notebook wrapped in oilskin. It had no name, but it contained a single entry written in a hurried, near-illegible scrawl. The light is not a warning, it is a key. What did Aidan see? Where did he go? And why does his story match the others? The chanting, the stillness, the sense of being watched from beneath. Eilean Mor has changed little in the decades since, but the reports have not stopped. In 1974, a radio operator stationed in Lewis picked up a signal during a routine sweep. The frequency was strange, lower than expected, pulsing. Not a voice at first, but a pattern of static that repeated every 37 seconds. Then, faintly, a voice. Flannan to shore. Flannan to shore. Over and over, though no manned station remained there. The transmission lasted 12 minutes before cutting off mid-word. Authorities investigated. Nothing was found. No vessel in range, no equipment activated. The lighthouse's automation logs showed no anomalies. But the signal was recorded. And when played back at reduced speed, researchers noticed something else. Beneath the voice, in the background, was a second sound. Chanting. Ancient Gaelic, distorted by wind and time, but unmistakable in rhythm and tone. That recording has been analyzed, dissected, even suppressed. Some claim it was a hoax, others a natural phenomenon. But those who heard it in person, those few still living, speak differently. One retired technician described it as a call to kneel. Another, more vividly, said, it felt like the island was waking up. Since that day, the air traffic routes were shifted subtly. Maritime maps were quietly amended to discourage passage within a 5 nautical mile radius. No official reason was given, but the local charts bear a warning now. Restricted waters, survey anomalies. Every decade or so, someone disappears in that region. A sailor gone without distress signal, a leisure craft never making port. A team of oceanographers whose GPS trackers looped endlessly in place before vanishing entirely. Always the same area. Always near Eilean Mor. And though the automation continues, and the light continues to spin, the logs now show something odd. On certain nights, always windless, always clear, the light flickers not in its usual pattern, but in a slow sequence, a pattern like blinking. Watching. It is said the sea forgets, but the island remembers, and its light, though it guides no ships now, still serves a purpose. A key. Or perhaps a door. In early 1993, a French filmmaker named Lucien Valot arrived in the Outer Hebrides, intending to capture the essence of Scotland's most desolate lands. He had heard of the Flannan Isles in passing, tales in pub corners, fishermen who lowered their voices when asked. But it was a local librarian who mentioned the logbooks, the ones from 1900. That librarian, it said, handed him not a book, but a photocopy, folded carefully inside a leather folio. Lucien's camera was found 2 years later, sealed in a waterproof case on the Isle of Skye. The footage, never released publicly, has become legend in underground circles. It shows the island, grey skies, jagged stone, distant birdsong, and then something else. A sequence of frames, no longer than a minute, where the camera remains still. In the distance, between gusts of wind, a figure stands at the edge of the cliff, cloaked, motionless, watching. Lucien's voice, faint, can be heard. He sees me. No trace of Lucien Valot was ever found. The only clue, if it is one, lies in the film's final seconds. The frame shakes violently, the wind grows louder, harsher, and then, a single word, not in French, not in English, whispered. Behar. Gaelic, meaning life. The screen cuts to black. Behar. Life. Or perhaps an invitation. There are theories, of course, that electromagnetic anomalies affect the brain, that prolonged isolation induces hallucination, that fear, in sufficient quantity, births memory where none existed. But these explanations never quite settle. They skate across the surface of something deeper, something that churns like the sea beneath a calm horizon. The monks who came to Eilean Mor came for silence, for prayer. But what if they found something more? What if the stillness revealed a truth too large for doctrine? What if the island didn't just offer solitude, but spoke, in its own language? What if, in their chants, they weren't praising, but pleading? The Flannan light still turns, still blinks, still waits. Now the chapel stones lie broken, their sacred geometry worn into curves by centuries of wind. But some claim they still form a circle, a space apart, a listening place. And once a year, on the longest night, A single raven lands atop the eastern lintel, silent as dusk. It watches. It waits. It always leaves alone. This is where we end, not because the story stops, but because it cannot go further, not safely. What remains of the truth lies beneath sea and stone, scattered in whispers and light. You may forget it tomorrow, or it may return to you in a dream, brought in on the tide of some still night. But if you ever find yourself near the Flannan Isles, and the weather is calm, and the horizon is wrong, remember this. Some lights do not warn. They